I just did Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now this, you guys are pushing it. Don't get me wrong, as I played this, I wondered to myself, why exactly did I not play this back in 2007? I mean, I was on a high as a little kid after playing Spider-Man 2, where I was just thinking to myself, shit, this is amazing. I am Spider-Man. I am swinging from the streets of Manhattan to the top of the skyscrapers, the tallest skyscrapers within New York City, as the Webbed Crusader. And here I am playing a Spider-Man, thinking like, man, I just cannot wait for the third game. I can't wait for the third movie, no less. But the third game, taking all of the elements that Treyarch kind of built for themselves in Spider-Man 2 and just carrying them over to Spider-Man 3, it's bound to be amazing. And for some reason, I just kind of fell out, and maybe it was the transition between consoles, since at that point we were introduced to the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, and more and more things kind of got unveiled for the PlayStation 3, such as Uncharted or Infamous, and my sights were kind of set on that and getting the PS3 as opposed to getting like the back version of Spider-Man 3. And I was just thinking, wow, the leap from standard definition to HD is just so groundbreaking that was what was mainly giving me tunnel vision and what exactly blinded me to the release of the Spider-Man 3 game, and just for some reason I managed to skip on it. Over time, I knew that the game existed across various platforms, but I thought to myself, why am I not exactly picking it up? It wasn't until I started doing these classic reviews, going back to some of the old Raimi movies, some of the old games, as well as various other things that was kind of getting into really deep discussions about Spider-Man, that I knew eventually Spider-Man 3 was going to be thrown into discussion, and now here we are. So before they go out of business, I went to my local GameStop, managed to pick up the PS3 version of the game, the collector's edition no less, and that's because there was no version of Spider-Man 3 on PS2, because everybody left and right in the comment section were saying that the PS2 version was far superior. I did not get them. I just did not understand why exactly the standard definition of the game was better. After doing a little bit of research, it turns out that Spider-Man 3 was torn in 3 separate directions, and that already spells trouble from the get-go, because Spider-Man 3 was made in 3 different ways. One by Beanox, who was no stranger to the Spider-Man 3 or the Spider-Man game, after their turns with Edge of Time and Shattered Dimensions on the last gen of consoles, and they were responsible for creating the Microsoft Windows version. Then we had Treyarch coming back and taking the reins over the HD interpretation of Spider-Man 3 on PlayStation 3, Wii, and Xbox 360. But then it was another developer called Vicarious Visions who handled the PlayStation 2 version, and they actually created completely different things for that version of Spider-Man 3. Unfortunately, that's not the version that I played. I understand that it's a brand new experience and probably an even better experience, but the one that I got stuck with is the Treyarch version on the PlayStation 3. Also, it happens to be the collector's edition. So, here's my review of Spider-Man 3 on the PlayStation 3. So I think everyone, including Treyarch themselves, knew it was going to be really tough to top what exactly they managed to create in Spider-Man 2 with its brand new web swinging mechanics and the combat and how fun and how full of life and personality that whole environment was, being able to traverse New York City at your will, and at the same time having the city kind of be its own character reacting to you. So what exactly is Treyarch got up their sleeve to be able to put into Spider-Man 3? Well, unfortunately, not a whole lot. And maybe the development about these different versions kind of stretched everybody so thin that it's almost like they didn't exactly manage to get an awful lot of people from the original Treyarch, and maybe they went over to Vicarious Visions, because I tried to look up some stories as to why exactly that refinement from Spider-Man 2 did not carry over into Spider-Man 3, despite this having at least an extra year of development time. You guys remember there was a 3-year gap between Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3, both the movies and the games, as opposed to the only 2-year gap between Spider-Man 1 and 2. So to me, it kind of boggles my mind why when I boot up this game, it is in the state that it is in. Now, right from the get-go, Spider-Man 3 is very similar in a way to Spider-Man 2. It carries on certain elements that I think there's no real getting around to, regardless of what type of game you're playing. And I think the most notable one is that being a video game based on a movie, you know that the movie material that it's basing off of that film is not exactly going to be as fully realized as it was, as expected from the past couple of games, where yes, you had some tie-ins with the main villains from the movie and some certain elements that they carried over, but the main focus is playing as Spider-Man and going throughout the city, kind of engaging in some of these movie elements while at the same time tackling some things that are nowhere to be found in the movie and are exclusive to the game. So it's very loosely adapted from the film, and because of that, I think we can kind of expect that there's not going to be any kind of proper character development or story pacing, and certain things just kind of happen, especially on the movie side, where certain characters get their origins just because, like Sandman is literally created in the first 5 minutes of the game within the credits. Like, there's no explanation behind that. There's no reasoning for him to be in this game. If the Spider-Man 3 movie did not exist, Sandman just becomes Sandman. Maybe in the PlayStation 2 version he might be a little different, but here, as solely reviewed within the PS3 version, Sandman just gets created. Topher Grace's version of Eddie Brock is thrown in there. Harry is attacking Peter without any kind of build-up or without any real excuse for him to be out of the game for so long, and things just kind of sort of happen. And I was surprised from the get-go how many of the voice talents they managed to get from the movie, even though there were some notable absences, like Kirsten Dunst. She didn't come back here. They used her likeness, but it's not exactly her voice. Yet they managed to get, of course, Tobey Maguire to reprise his role as Peter and a couple of other people. But to me, it was really surprising how they managed to get Thomas Hayden Church, Topher Grace, and James Franco to be in this game. Unfortunately, you can easily tell this is a simple check for them, and they recorded all of their lines in a matter of not even hours, probably just even minutes, under an hour or so, because not only are they barely in the game, because again, it kind of barely sort of adapts from the movie, so their involvement in the game is just kind of like, why are they even here? You couldn't have gone like a sound-alike like Thomas Hayden Church or whatever, and it's sometimes a little awkward or uncomfortable to hear some of these people give their lines when you can clearly tell that they're just there to get this whole thing over with.
Back off. Now, gonna have to hurt you.
He just threw sand in my face. I mean, maybe they're not at the point where they want to put a bullet in their head, but maybe they're just looking forward to what exactly they can maybe buy with that check. I mean, I know that sounds heinous, but I'll be damned if that wasn't exactly the quality that we got from some of these different actors, most notably James Franco, even though he has the luxury of probably being stoned the majority of the time. What's even more tragic is that kind of happens a little bit with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Bruce Campbell, who returns as the narrator to kind of walk you along during the first hour or so of the game, introducing the new mechanics. He sounds kind of drained. Even he wasn't exactly given an awful lot of material to work with. Ever so often he had a line that was kind of hilarious, but I remember more quotable things from him in Spider-Man 1 and 2 than he was here.
Press the attack button to attack. I'm sorry, am I going too fast for you? There are actually
Bruce Campbell's back, and yet that was somewhat uncharismatic. There were a couple of exceptions, though. J.K. Simmons was brought in to do J. Jonah Jameson in this game, and yet he still manages to carry over the charisma and the prowess that he did as J.K. Simmons in the movies, and I think that was a miracle for the folks at Treyarch. You better be damn proud that you managed to get somebody of the caliber of J.K. Simmons, who you can easily tell he loves the character. Sure, the prosthetics might be kind of annoying for him, but actually interpreting the character, he's just having an awful lot of fun, and you can still hear it in his voice in this game, and I think that's rather miraculous. What's also kind of interesting is that Tobey Maguire, he is still better than he was in the first game. I think he's on par with how he was in the second game. But what's kind of interesting is that he was able to play around with certain elements from the movie, but in a different way, where he had some creative opportunities. Because what was kind of interesting about this game is that when they adapt the symbiote storyline and you have evil Peter kind of walking around, you have Tobey Maguire as well as the writers doing some interesting things with the symbiote, whether it be with certain elements from the movie where he has interactions with Mary Jane under the influence of the suit and he's being kind of edgy, but at least he says some things that I don't think he would have said in the movie, but he managed to say here, and I was like, God damn! But also, more importantly, they used the suit to kind of influence how he interacts with certain things that were not from the movie, like so much more of the comic book stuff. And I'm like, okay, at least you did not waste this. So those were some rather interesting opportunities that they managed to take. Now, as for those comic book related things that they just managed to grab out of the rogue gallery of Spider-Man and put right away here in Spider-Man 3 to I don't want to say pad out the game, but just fill it up so that it's at a reasonable running time, while at the same time not taking too much stuff from the movie that you can clearly tell cannot really be good content for a game. So it was interesting to see some of these characters be either brought into this new universe or be returned from prior games, only with a brand new twist on them, such as Scorpion, the Lizard, and even Kingpin. And they were really fun to see in this game and see Spider-Man interact with them, especially since you know that some of these folks, you're not going to see them in the movies anytime soon. And out of all of them, I think the most compelling one was Scorpion, because he was given kind of like a tragic arc, and I actually kind of felt for him. Even though it was really weird to see that they kind of pretty much ignored his appearance in the first game. Like that whole Oscorp stuff, no, it's like it never happened, and it's a little jarring. And the Lizard, interpreted by, you can kind of say, Raimi's version of Kurt Connors, who was actually voiced by Dylan Baker, who played him in the movies, is actually here, and he turns into the Lizard, and you actually have to defeat him and go through that plot with him. And I think this is the closest thing as we're going to get to Raimi's interpretation of the Lizard, should had there been a Spider-Man 4 or whatever. It's just a shame that the only reason why I didn't find it as compelling as Scorpion is because over time I just got tired of defeating those lizard creatures that were just kind of fodder, and spending time in the sewers, it just got kind of repetitive for me. Aside from the new supervillains, there's also these other gangs that moved into New York City, and it gives Spidey something to do and some enemies to beat up so that you can have a good time. But these are some generic-ass gangs. You got some that look like they were lifted from Mad Max. You got some Harley Quinn-looking wannabes, and they're just there for Spidey to beat up. Nothing more, nothing less. Now let's talk about one of the more apparent things about Spider-Man 3, that it's on the PS3. And this was one of the big key differences, because we are now jumping into high definition back in 2007 from the previous Spider-Man games. Even though they were still doing their fair share of cross-platforming, because there was a PS2 version, being on the PS3 gave Treyarch the opportunity to go HD and widen the frame and sharpen up the visuals and give it that proper resolution. And it's clearly here. Everything's a lot sharper, a lot cleaner, a lot tighter, visually at least. But it compromised a little bit of the design, because I gotta be honest, almost every single character model in this game is rather ugly. They got some bug eyes and some really weird skin formations, and their arms and hands just look really fucking weird. And also, I don't know if at this point they managed to incorporate mocap, but the way they run, or the way it's like they didn't get the proper people to interpret some of these folks. There's a couple scenes where Peter has to run, and he just has like the most wimpiest run, and it just did not translate very well.
Parker! That's the third call I got about giant lizards running amok in Gramercy Park. Giant lizards! Pronto!
On top of that, there's just some bland textures and things in the environment that just seemed like, it just made me feel like, oh, I'm in a video game, not an environment. There's even some texture pop-ins and a god-awful camera, especially whenever Spidey had to climb walls. The camera just did not know what to do with itself, and there were times where it was either frustrating me, getting me killed, or I will admit, even making me a little dizzy. And I hardly ever get dizzy with video games, and especially even with first-person games. It's a third-person game, and it's making me dizzy because of how fucking insane the camera is. It's just, there's no excuse for how wonky the camera is here. Now, I mentioned that the environment could be a little bland. How exactly can New York City be bland? It's one of the most vibrant living cities in the world, and they did an amazing job to interpret that with personality in Spider-Man 2. A personality that is unfortunately nowhere to be found here in Spider-Man 3. I was really saddened and dismayed to swing through the city of New York here in Spider-Man 3 and not hear a single soul within it. Like, you got multiple NPCs walking through the street doing the same programmed action. Ever so, like every 10 or so seconds, you would find the same individual doing the exact same thing or modeled the exact same way. And none of them called any kind of attention to the fact that Spidey was swinging right next to them, and then later on where he manages to change into the black suit, nobody exactly calls attention to that. And sure, maybe I'm thinking that maybe I'm asking for too much out of a movie tie-in, a little bit too much detail to be paid to a game of this caliber. However, it's just that even in that time when we were doing HD gaming, and after showing that it can be done with games like Spider-Man 2, where ever so often you would have an NPC just say, "Spidey, you the man," and then Spider-Man would retort to that. I'm sorry, just bang the here. And then you had characters give him little things for him to do, like the little robberies and stuff like that. There's none of that found here. Ever so often you would maybe hear a character kind of mumble to themselves because they're talking on the phone, but there's no sense of personality or character found within New York City. It just feels like a void that is just there for me to get from point A to point B as I navigate through the story and through the missions that are gonna propel me forward. Okay, character models are bad. The city is empty and lifeless. At least the swinging can be fun. Yes and no. It's still significantly better than it was in Spider-Man 1, where you just press one button and it's the same routine movement over and over. But it's not as refined or as fluid or as fun as it was in Spider-Man 2. It's kind of like a little bit in between, but the needle does point a little bit more towards Spider-Man 2 than it actually does to Spider-Man 1, where it still kind of keeps the same mentality where you have to follow the swinging motion and just have it be mapped to your buttons, where you swing, jump off, and then shoot another web to swing again. Except there's just something about the fluidity or the way that the collision system works that is just not 100% there. I just can't exactly put my finger on it. But the collision system is just not there, whether it be with Spidey hitting certain buildings and throwing him off, or him not managing to find a decent fucking building to shoot his web to. There's moments where I knew that there was a building around for him to shoot the web and attach himself to there, because it doesn't have the same mentality as Spider-Man 1 did, where he can swing no matter what, even if it's from the sky. Here, they keep that still going from Spider-Man 2, except he should be able to attach to some of these buildings, and yet the webbing just wasn't there. He just wasn't shooting, and multiple times I would find myself falling closely to my death, even though I knew that there was a building there and he just wouldn't attach to it. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's just my own little personal observation, but the fluidity of the web swinging just wasn't as fun, it wasn't as rapid, and would constantly get interrupted by some collision issues. But the bright side, however, is that swinging, when done right in this game, is actually rather fun, and they even tweaked a few of the animations of Spidey swinging, whether it be with the normal red and blue suit or the black suit, where you can see some subtle changes in the way that he would swing, whether it be in a much more aggressive manner or the way that he would twist his body. There was a little bit added detail there that I did appreciate, and I thought, okay, that's kind of cool, and I didn't see that level of detail to his movements in Spider-Man 2, so good job on that. So I guess while on the subject of swinging, I should probably talk about the gameplay. Similarly, it's kind of similar to the swinging, where there's a little bit of the DNA from Spider-Man 2 somewhat carrying over here, except it just feels like something is a little off. And maybe it could also be blamed on the collision system, but this time, and I understand that I believe the gameplay is also tweaked a little differently in the Vicarious Visions version of Spider-Man 3 on the PlayStation 2. However, in Spider-Man 3, done by Treyarch, they did away with the upgrade store, so they can't really be purchased. You only earn upgrades as you complete missions across the city, whether it be missions that have to do with the main story, involving some of the movie plots or comic book plots, or even defeating some of the local gangs with their own little things going down on the side. And that's where you earn your upgrades, whether it be brand new combos or new upgrades to your swinging or to your health. And that's all cool and done, and ever so often if you pull off the right combo, especially after memorizing some of the button inputs, it's really fun seeing Spidey do some of these kick-ass moves. Even a couple of times I was amused myself where I managed to take down a heap load of enemies with the right combo and being able to use some of the web moves that he's got and the ones that he acquired and put them to really good use. Except Again, the fluidity of the combat, jumping from one enemy to another, just didn't feel as refined than it did in Spider-Man 2. And do not get me started on those 3 magical little words. Quick time events. Revolutionary at the time, Treyarch decided it would be a good idea to input QuickTime events into Spider-Man 3, and they were the bane of my fucking existence, because QuickTime events can be done right. At that point, we already had 2 God of War games that showed definitive examples of doing QuickTime events right, and yet here they managed to fuck it up. And again, maybe it could be done because of the collision system that I just mentioned that's just really iffy and pick and choosy here in this game, and that might be the reasoning, because so many times I could have sworn I hit the right button at the right time, and the game just didn't think it was right, especially towards the end. And it was just immensely infuriating. Come on, I pressed it. What am I doing? You want me to hit the controller? You want me to punch the sticks in? Oh. But on the bright side, it did make some for hilarious death animations. I don't know who was in charge of creating the death animations, but something tells me that they were a huge Three Stooges fan. Every time Spidey died or got defeated somehow by inputting the wrong button during a QTE, it's just stuff of wonders. From what I can tell, this guy... Oh my god, here it is! Oh my... It's Wonderful.
I'm going to die.
Now, did they at least take an opportunity to tweak the gameplay when he changes into the black suit? Because the movie, and as well as the comics, made it clear that the black suit gives him some added agility, strength, perseverance, all that good stuff. Maybe even a little dosage of libido. Here, they kind of did that, but it's not exactly night and day. Yeah, the animations of him swinging are a little tweaked to look a little bit more aggressive, and it's cool to always have the black suit to change up the dynamic of the red and blue. The only added feature is a conventional rage mode, which of course by definition means that when you geared up enough amount of rage within your meter, you activate rage mode and you got some added strength, agility, and you mainly want to utilize this rage mode when defeating some really hefty bosses such as Kraven and Rhino when you get to them. But other than that, there's not exactly anything that makes playing as black-suited Spider-Man immensely better or empowering or awesome as it did when he was just red and blue. There's a couple of combos and mechanics that only work exclusively during the black suit, but that's not to say that that's going to take away from the other combos that you managed to acquire as Spidey when he was doing the red and blue suit. So it's like, okay, you know, pick and choose which combos you like to see on screen. Other than that, it's gonna pretty much do it the same thing to their enemies. And of course, you got the rage mode. Admittingly, there were a couple of moments where I was getting so used to the rage mode that when it got kind of taken away until you finally complete the game, that's when I started to somewhat miss it, but I was still managed to make do. It didn't put some kind of hindrance on me. Now, without delving into too many spoilers, even though by this point you should know how Spider-Man 3, both the movie and the game, should play out, at the end, out of left field, you get introduced to a brand new gameplay system. One that you get to jump back into after completing the game on your own volition. And that's playing as the New Goblin. That's right. Harry Osborn, aka the New Goblin, is playable, especially in the Collector's Edition right off the bat. After that, however, it was provided as a DLC for the PS3 version, should you choose to purchase it separately. Fuck that thing. Right from the get-go, the game tells you that New Goblin is controlled via the motion controls within the sensor of the PS3 controller. And it is atrocious. I fucking hate these controls. I was so glad to discover that in the end you can control New Goblin with the stick, but by then it's too little too late. I was just on the verge of a migraine from trying to control New Goblin, especially during the climax of the game. And then there's no further incentive to play as the New Goblin after you completed the game, because I don't know if this is considered a spoiler, but when you jump back into his version of gameplay, there's not much to do. The game then tweaks itself to just doing like trials, like races or defeating certain enemies under a certain amount of time, and that's it. All those other things that you probably wanted to do on the side that you never got to complete, such as the Daily Bugle missions or the really weirdly named Mary Jane thrill rides. It's not exactly what you think, even though that probably would have made for a better game. None of that gets to be used when you're New Goblin, after you've beat the game, post-game, you know? So it's like, okay, you got these shitty controls, and you got no real dynamic change to the environment or to the mission style as New Goblin. Okay, back to Spidey it is. And so once you complete the main story, you do have a couple of other things to do around the city, such as those Mary Jane thrill ride missions, where you have to impress her with your swinging skills, even though that's probably the least of his problems at that point.
I didn't want to go this way.
Are you going to complain about every little thing?
Oh! And also take photos for the Daily Bugle, reminiscent of the Spider-Man 2 days. Besides that, like I mentioned, similarly to New Goblin, there's some time trials that you can do where you have to get from point A to point B under a certain amount of time, or do some skydiving missions that I had no idea how they played out. I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but they were shitty. And the game kind of somewhat starts over where you can go through some of the main missions again, only this time if you want to do them on a harder level, or if you want to do them quicker, you can do so. But besides that, there's no real definitive replay value except what maybe Spider-Man 2 had going for it, which is to just swing through the city and feel the vibrance and the personality of New York City. Without that, any of those elements there, Spider-Man 3, at least on the PlayStation 3, ends up feeling hollow, and the experience to getting to that point of completion wasn't exactly a walk in the park either there, with some technical issues revolving around the animations, the voice talent, as well as that god-awful camera. Despite there being some redeeming qualities, such as the little opportunities they managed to take with the black suit, both story-wise and gameplay-wise, and having some moments of levity that reminded me an awful lot of Spider-Man 2. Like I said, ever so often, something good from the Spider-Man 2 Treyarch days managed to creep on over here, like the symbiote does over to Peter, and he takes him over. It still did not exactly resolve my mystery that I was having. I was playing this game, is why exactly did something like this get created in 3 years as opposed to the 2 years they had to create something as awesome as Spider-Man 2. Until this day, I will never know, but maybe the splitting of the development teams has something to do with it, and maybe Treyarch was just a little preoccupied with something else coming on the horizon, especially after jumping into a brand new generation of consoles, and maybe at that point they were signing over that deal to take over some Call of Duty duties as they jumped into the Black Ops line, and maybe that has something to do with it. But for the time being, I am saddened that I did not manage to play the PS2 version, because I am fully convinced now that that probably was the superior version. So I'm going to be giving Spider-Man 3 a very high 6 out of 10, only because there were some cool and nifty things that they did manage to do with some of the gameplay and some of the black suited elements. But besides that, this is not exactly a game that I'll be revisiting anytime soon. Alright, so there, I did it. I reviewed Amazing Spider-Man 2, got Spider-Man 3 out of the way, so I think it only makes sense to tackle something cool and something awesome, so I think it's time for Ultimate Spider-Man. No, not the cartoon, the game. One of the most underrated games of Spider-Man on the GameCube. At least that's what I've heard. Let's see if they're correct, and let's see if I manage to get it before GameStop goes under. So please let me know in the comments below what you guys think of my review for Spider-Man 3. What are your thoughts on Spider-Man 3? Which version did you manage to get lucky enough to play? The PS3 version or the PlayStation 2, GameCube, or Wii version? I don't know which ones were made by who. I'll have to check that list again. But at least I'm hoping that you guys had somewhat of a good experience, or at least an entertaining experience that will give you some fun memories. Whichever one they were, post them in the comments below. Make sure you like and share this video to show your support for it, and of course subscribe for more classic reviews such as this one coming very soon. Until next time guys, I will see you all later. I gave my initial review back in 2014. I think you can still check it out on this channel. And feel free to do so after watching this review to see the comparisons, because I can't even fucking remember what I said, except that it kind of somewhat mirrors about what I'm about to mention, except here I'm about to break it down scene by scene. Alright, so we got the studio logos, as every movie tends to have. We got the Columbia logo, check. Marvel logo, check. Oh, this one's a new one. I didn't know that we're doing a Lionsgate movie. Oh, whoa. That's not a logo? Okay, that was fucking weird.